I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 407. Thank you all so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Welcome to all of you new listeners. Hope you will stick around, check out all the back catalog, the 406 previous episodes, and stick around for more coming next week. This week, we are finally joined again by our good friend, the Pistol Packing Padre himself, Pastor John Bennett. Welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd. It's good to be back.
It is great to have you here. We've been together for some online hangouts, but we've just... one thing or another has prevented us from getting together to do a Clinging to God and Guns show for a while, so it's nice to do that again.
Last time we were talking about Karen Johnson, so hopefully this content will be a little more appealing to our listeners.
Yes. Before we do get into today's content, I do want to remind everyone that Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded. We don't have any sponsors. We don't have any advertising. We rely on the generosity of our members, the members of the Reformation Gun Club, people like Donald from Berthoud, Colorado, Kevin from Marion, Iowa, Michael from Bel Air, Maryland, Kenneth from Sugarland, Texas, Kurt from Rialto, California, Robert from Elk River, Minnesota, Dan from South Lyon, Michigan, Melvin from Holt, Missouri, the disreputable Bartlett, who after all these years is still disreputable, and Robert from Monroe, Georgia. Thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club for making this show and everything we do possible. If you would like to find out more about the Reformation Gun Club, if you would like to help support the show and keep it going in the future, get access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, some cool Armed Lutheran swag, and invitations to our aforementioned monthly online hangouts, visit reformationgunclub.com and sign up today. We would love to have you join us. All right. What are we talking about today? I have just outlined a couple of things that I thought we might dig into that I'd hoped we would dig into last week, and then migraine just derailed all of those plans, so I ended up coming up with a little bit of a spiel about Father's Day and Hunter Biden as a really poor substitute. But there have been some really interesting court cases that I thought it might be fun to discuss, as the everything from the Supreme Court on down have basically shat all over the gun grabbers in the last week and a half. So
that's
thought
about
we
the
would
only
dig
thing
in.
they're good at doing. No, I take that back. I'm sorry. What am I saying? I'm tired.
That's only thing. Lately, it has been an interesting run of positive judgments from the courts. Even as, states have tried to get around some of the rulings, like Bruin, there are still states who are trying to negotiate their way around those rulings. But every time a gun ban raises its ugly head, it's like whack-a-mole, and the federal courts just start smacking them down. And the big one is the one that you and I have talked about over the past few years. I guess it's been, I don't remember how long now, but this is the bump stock ban that came in under President Trump. And this is from Reuters. The U.S. Supreme Court on Friday, this would be Friday last, declared unlawful a federal ban on bump stock devices that enable semi-automatic weapons to fire rapidly like machine guns, rejecting yet another firearms restriction, this time one enacted under Republican former President Donald Trump. The justices, in a 6-3 ruling authored by conservative Justice Clarence Thomas, upheld a lower court's decision, siding with Michael Cargill, a gun shop owner and gun rights advocate from Austin, Texas, who challenged the ban by claiming that a U.S. agency improperly interpreted a federal law banning machine guns as extending to bump stocks. The conservative justices were in the majority, with liberal justices dissenting, which is not a real shock. This is why Joe Biden recently, and I think it was at this, he looked like he was on the verge of passing out, but as he was mumbling along, talking about how this wasn't our parents', he's a constitutional scholar, and he knows this Supreme Court is just way out of touch with the mainstream and how crazy and radical they are that they would do things like this.
What's really ironic about that is, except for this, the most recent Supreme Court decision, and this is kind of what I was alluding at with my little slip there. That's about the only thing they're good for these days. When the Supreme Court refused to take up the case brought by a group of physicians against the proliferation of mifepristone via the mail, which is the most commonly used abortion drug. So,
right.
Yeah, that I thought was a very poor decision. I mean, even looking at and it was a 9-0 decision too. So, but that
I did not see that ruling, or wasn't sure exactly what their reasoning for not taking it up was. Is it maybe that they wanted that left to the states? Their
reasoning, the Supreme Court said that the physicians did not have standing because there was no demonstration of harm. However, a number of the physicians had argued that they had patients who had suffered harm because of these drugs. Therefore, they wanted, that's why they wanted to take up the case, essentially banning the use of this drug without a prescription.
All right. So
I know we're getting off topic. We can get back to the one thing the Supreme Court has been good at lately, which is the Second Amendment.
Rights. Yes. So naturally, Biden basically said that this was striking down an important gun safety regulation. I don't know that this is another misuse of that phrase, gun safety. It was basically for those who don't know what a bump stock is, and to be honest, this is not a ruling. This was not something, when Trump announced it, was not something that affected me. I don't know anybody that actually owns one of these things, but at the same time, that doesn't mean, just because it doesn't affect me, doesn't mean that I don't care about the case. This was the argument that they were originally making, or that Trump was making, and this was in 2019 after the Las Vegas shooting, right?
Right. Yep.
Or 20, yes. So you had that guy that, oddly enough, we still don't know anything about all these years later. And it's been, 7 years now, and we still don't know anything about the guy or his motive or any of that. The guy shot up a music festival from his hotel room in Las Vegas, killed 58 people, and many of the firearms that he used were equipped with bump stocks. And what a bump stock is, again, for those who don't know, is a device that basically uses the recoil impulse of a gun, a rifle, to actuate the trigger multiple times. So as long as you basically hold the gun, the stock against your shoulder and your finger on the trigger, the recoil of the rifle will actuate the trigger multiple times. So the argument that this is a machine gun falls flat because this is not actually an automatic weapon, which is currently defined under the National Firearms Act as a weapon that fires automatically more than one shot by a single pull of the trigger.
Right. Well, and the bump stock really is just a piece of plastic, you know, and it does require some additional technique from the shooter. It's not like you just pull the trigger and it's, instantly firing in full automatic.
Right.
You know, but, well, and it, even though it doesn't, necessarily, quote unquote, directly affect people who do not have a bump stock, it affects us in the repercussions of it. So, if it's okay to ban this because it increases the rate of fire, what about binary triggers? What about, match triggers that reduce the pull weight of the trigger to, a sub 3 pound pull? Where do you draw the line?
Right. And what Justice Thomas wrote in his opinion was that we hold that a semi-automatic rifle equipped with a bump stock is not a machine gun because it cannot fire more than one shot by a single function of the trigger. And put those in quotes, quoting the National Firearms Act. And even if it could, it would not do so automatically, again in quotes. ATF therefore exceeded its statutory authority by issuing a rule that classified bump stocks as machine guns. And I think I saw this week, it looks like immediately after this, of course, the Biden administration called for a ban on bump stocks through legislation. And I think that's sort of what Thomas and the conservatives on the court were getting at here is if you want to, you can't ban this thing under the National Firearms Act because it doesn't meet the NFA's definition of a machine gun. If you want to ban this thing, you're going to have to pass legislation or amend the NFA to do it. You can't just have the ATF come out and make this arbitrary ruling and ban something that was not previously banned by law.
Right. Well, and Michael, I'd have to look more into the details of the NFA, but does this potentially open up the door for things like eliminating the tax stamp requirement for an SBR? I don't know if that's something that's outlined in the NFA or not.
I think we're getting close to that. I think there's the possibility that this would have, a lot of the things and again, haven't read a great deal in depth on this, but a lot of the things that I have seen in passing have suggested that this could open the door to a more restrictive view of the NFA that might change things, result in changes in things like SBRs and SBSs. I'm not sure about suppressors, but it certainly gets us closer to that day when, for those who have the T-shirts that say ban the NFA or repeal the NFA, or in the NFA, we might be getting closer to having an NFA that makes sense. The NFA never, I don't think, really ever made sense to begin with. It was I mean, it was passed at a time. Wasn't the NFA was what 1930? Was it the NFA that was 1934 and 68 was the National Firearm or was? Wait a minute, I'm getting them confused. For all the people who claim that there's not enough. We don't have enough gun laws.
Yeah, the NFA originally 1934. Just
34.
Looking it up online. Yeah, it says the NFA. It included shotguns and rifles having barrels less than 18 inches in length. Certain firearms described as any other weapons and so forth. So,
and this was,
it never made sense in the first place. It was essentially a response to mob violence where you had, mobs, people in the mafia mowing down crowds of people with machine guns. So it was a knee-jerk reaction.
As most bad legislation is.
Yeah. It's notably was it the St. Valentine's Day massacre?
Yeah,
that was the one that preceded the decision. So it's time for it to go.
Yes, and the idea that cutting down a rifle or a shotgun or having a shotgun or a rifle that's below 16-inch barrel length or whatever suddenly makes it more deadly or makes it more concealable. You're still talking about a long gun, essentially.
Right. Right.
And similar amounts of damage could be done with a handgun. And I think originally weren't pistols and revolvers going to be part of the NFA, and that somehow was changed. Seems like I do a little looking here, a little Googling.
I'm not sure. But while you're looking that up, just my commentary on that is the NFA, if it was to be successful in stopping gang violence, then we wouldn't have gangbangers in the year 2024 being able to get their hands on a MAC-10 and mow down crowds of other teenagers.
Right. And you can still take a semi-automatic firearm and with a little bit of bad gunsmithing or tinkering, turn the thing into a full auto firearm.
Right. Or you get a black market Glock switch.
Yeah, and you don't even, you to be honest, you don't even need a Glock switch if you know what you're doing on the inside of the gun.
Right.
I have seen plenty of friends sharing video where they did a little home gunsmithing and accidentally, they're out on the range testing it and then end up, with the gun basically running away.
Right. Yeah.
Just emptying a mag in no time.
It's not hard to do. You shave down your sear enough, and the impact of the bolt or the slide of the firearm, depending on the design of the firearm, going into battery, it's enough to make it drop the hammer.
Yep.
We are not giving gunsmithing advice to anyone in case the ATF is listening.
Absolutely not. This is all the kind of thing that you can do. And this is, I guess, my point of bringing it up is if you're not careful, you try to do some gunsmithing on your own and try to maybe make your gun have a lighter trigger pull for competition, you can very easily screw up and create an illegal weapon.
Yes, you can.
So trust your local gunsmith and send your business to them because they need your business rather than going and taking a chance on screwing your gun up and doing something that you will regret later. Let's just put it that way. But the whole NFA is now 70, 80, 90 years. Has it been 90 years? Yes, it has. It's been 90 years this year. So it's time to revisit that and repeal it or seriously amend it. My worry, though, would be that they would amend it and they would change the tax stamp. that would be the amendment that they would make, because the $200 tax stamp that was required to purchase a registered or one of these restricted items like a suppressor or a short-barreled rifle or a short-barreled shotgun, or to convert your firearm into one of those things, it was $200 in 1934. It's still $200 today.
Right.
That's like $4,000 today in today's money. So
let's not give them any ideas.
Let's not give them any. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And the other problem with the bump stock ban, which is very similar to a couple of the other things that we will talk about in a moment, the other two decisions we'll talk about in a moment, is that millions or tens of thousands, at the very least, tens of thousands of Americans, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans, owned these pieces of plastic that were heretofore not illegal, and overnight, because of an executive order and a ruling by the ATF, they are suddenly felons, because this suddenly turned that little piece of plastic was overnight converted into legally into a machine gun, which makes the possessor subject to a federal offense, and 10 years in prison for violation of the NFA?
I think it's like 10 years in prison, $10,000 fine, or both, at the discretion of the prosecutor, or the discretion of the judge in sentencing. I think that's what it is. But
sheesh.
Yeah, you can, and that's Hunter Biden for lying on the Form 4473. Let's face it, Daddy is going to commute to sentence, because Hunter Biden's going to spill the beans on Daddy if Daddy doesn't prevent him from going to prison.
Yeah, he's going to get that sentence going to get commuted. He's not going to spend any time in jail.
No.
No matter how much the Biden family says, "Oh, we respect the courts," they clearly do not.
Not a bit.
No. Violations of the NFA punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all devices or firearms in violation, and the individual right to own or possess firearms in the future, and a $10,000 penalty for certain violations. A willful attempt to evade or defeat a tax imposed by the act is a felony God, why can't I say that tonight? I haven't even been drinking. This is not. Maybe I need to drink to make this a little better. But evading the tax stamp basically is punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. Holy cow! The felony fine of $100,000 for tax evasion could be increased to $250,000. Good Lord. Yeah, they absolutely need to make a change to that. And the downstream problem with the NFA too was that in 1968, when you tack on the national, the Gun Control Act of 68, which basically said that you can't import any items that don't conform with the NFA. So a 15, a rifle, let's say you get an AK with or an Israeli made rifle with a 15-inch barrel, it's now no longer, you can't even import one of those. So any firearms manufacturer that has a popular type of rifle that they sell commercially overseas, if it doesn't meet the NFA, then it can't be imported. Right.
Well, and there's also, so I got into this with when I had bought a Saiga, if you know what those are. I had bought one for, this will tell you how the prices have jumped on those. I got one brand new in the box for $450 the day Obama got elected.
Oh, wow.
Yep. and it was the sporterized version where basically it looks like a semi-automatic rifle, like a sporting rifle, like a standard rifle buttstock. There was no pistol grip or anything. The second I modified that, I had to follow the 922 compliance laws, which say so many parts have to be U.S. made parts.
Right.
So I couldn't just move the trigger group, slap on any pistol grip and buttstock I wanted to. I had to change a buttload of parts and make sure that I'm compliant. Now, granted, one could say I didn't have to do any of that. But then again, if I get caught, I'm looking at 10 years in prison and possibly a $10,000 fine.
Yep.
Just for modifying the appearance and the ergonomics of something that I already own. It'd be akin to charging you with a felony if you put different wheels on your vehicle. I got new rims. I didn't get the proper certification from the ATF. Guess I'm going to prison.
And it doesn't make, just like the new wheels don't make the car faster necessarily or more deadly on the streets. It doesn't. Your cosmetic changes to your firearm don't make the gun more deadly.
Nope.
And they do. And those regulations have done nothing in 90 years to actually prevent violent crime or gangland crime, which was the original purpose for the NFA in the first place.
Right.
If a criminal wants to make a gun more concealable or make it an automatic weapon, they can still do it without the NFA preventing them from doing it. All it does is it makes people like you and me jump through hoops to have a gun that we want to play with on the weekend or use to protect our families or go hunting with.
Right.
Not that a bump stock is something you go hunting with. That definitely falls in the category of range toy. Not something you are going to go out. That's one of those, how Biden is always talking about, what are you going to do? Always talking about the deer and their bulletproof vests.
Right. And you need an F-15 if you're going to take on the government.
Right.
Yeah. First president in American history to basically threaten American citizens with warplanes if they get out of line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Or drop a nuke on you, as what's his name, Swallowwell said.
Yeah.
When he wasn't banging Fang Fang, he was threatening everyone with nuclear annihilation.
That or farting on national television during interviews.
That's true.
Remember that one?
When you got that much hot air, I guess it's just too hard to keep it in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have a drill and a 3/16 inch bit and an AR receiver, if you had those in the same room at the same time, I'm sure the ATF would find a way to put you in prison.
Yeah, probably. I have not been at all impressed with the ATF. Director? What is his name? Dettelbach? What a complete clown that guy is. He doesn't seem like a serious person at all. Did you see the video? Was it the ATF that put this video out talking about the ghost guns or maybe it was the Glock switch that changes your Glock handgun into essentially a Glock 18, into an automatic handgun. Did you see that video?
No, I did not.
There was an interview with I think it was a news station, and they had a couple of quote unquote experts from the ATF to talk about this, the Glock switch, and to demonstrate how easy it was to convert a Glock into a Glock handgun into basically a machine pistol. And it took a full 2.5 minutes for this gun expert to disassemble a Glock. He fought with it and struggled and fought and recocked it and pulled the trigger and swept his own hand multiple times, and then had to go and switch to a different Glock to try it again. And it took nearly 2 minutes for him to do it.
Wow.
And they still put that on the air.
That's like that video they had that naval officer with the AR-15 or an M4, whatever it was he was holding, where the
that awful grip. Yeah, where he had the toe of the stock like right in his clavicle basically, and that was the weirdest looking grip I've ever seen.
Yeah.
For somebody who's supposedly a guy in the military and an expert.
Right.
Our elites in government beclowning themselves at every turn.
Indeed,
Experts,
that's what they're good at,
quote unquote. Well, here's this other ruling I wanted to discuss was similar to the bump stock, but this is the pistol brace rule that a federal judge has now vacated. This is from John Crump over at AmmoLand. A Texas federal district judge vacated the ATF's final rule for pistol stabilizing devices. And for those of you who don't know what this means, it's a tiny piece of plastic that you attach to any firearm that is classified as a pistol, that is having no buttstock, and it's essentially a short-barreled rifle with no buttstock, right? And you put this piece of plastic on the back in place of the shoulder stock, and the purpose is that you can help stabilize the gun when you're shooting it offhand with one hand. It's marketed as a way for those who have some sort of physical disability to be able to shoot these kinds of firearms. Typically, though, this is I hate to say it, but this is a way around the short-barreled rifle designation. And this gets back to how stupid the NFA is, because the definitions in the NFA are ridiculous. But these devices were originally perfectly fine according to the ATF. And then they weren't. Help me the time, maybe not the timeline on this, but it was originally they were fine. Then they reviewed it and said they weren't fine and scared everybody to death. And then they decided they were fine again. And then under this new ATF director, they came out with a final rule which said it makes it a short-barreled rifle, therefore you're in if you have one installed on your firearm, you are immediately in violation of the NFA.
Right.
And a felon.
Well, there was when they said they weren't okay, there was this weird caveat they put in there that it was okay as long as the pistol brace didn't touch your shoulder when you were in the process of firing, as if...
Yes.
So basically it was saying, this is perfectly okay, but if at any point you use it as if it were a actual buttstock, then you've converted it into an SBR. You're in violation of the law. It was the most obtuse, idiotic thing.
Yep. I remember that now. I completely forgot about that. Yeah, their first ruling was so weird As long as it didn't touch your shoulder, you were fine. So it was not a ruling on the item itself. It was dependent on how you used it, which is absolutely unenforceable.
Right. Right.
Unless you're going to have an ATF agent stationed at every gun range in America.
Reminds me of that gif of, I don't remember what cartoon it was from. It might have been like King of the Hill or something, where you have a group of ATF agents that start peering over the fence. You see just their nose and eyes and their hats.
That's such a good meme. Apparently, at the request of President Biden, the ATF introduced this new rule. This was the quote-unquote final rule that reclassified pistols equipped with stabilizing devices. It considered the pistol braces as stocks, and therefore the brace would make the firearm a short-barreled rifle, and any rifle under 16 inches, or with a barrel under 16 inches, and an overall length, I think, under 26 inches, it's automatically a National Firearms Act item, and you either have to take that brace off or register it with the government. That's the other thing, is that in order to buy a short-barreled rifle or convert your rifle to a short-barreled rifle, your pistol to a short-barreled rifle, you have to actually register your firearm, all your information, fingerprints and everything with the NFA, with the ATF.
Right.
And so it creates this national firearm registry. And this said that anybody who owns these, or this final rule decided that anybody who owned this piece of plastic, if you had it installed on your gun, you had to register it with the ATF as if it were a short-barreled rifle and pay the $200 tax stamp and get your name on the National Firearms Registry.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to be really technical, you would have had to remove the pistol brace, wait whatever the turnaround time is at this present moment to get your tax stamp, and then you could put it on.
Then put it back on. Right. Yep. And if you didn't, you were instantly a felon. So several gun organizations filed for injunctions. All the organizations received injunctions from different courts. Eventually, a nationwide injunction would be issued. One of those cases, Mock versus Garland, filed by the Firearms Policy Coalition. After an original loss, FPC appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where 3 judges ruled that the ATF, or that the Firearms Policy Coalition was entitled to an injunction and remanded the case back to district court. ATF lawyers tried to argue that the plaintiffs were not eligible for an injunction because the Tax Anti-Injunction Act states that no suit for the purpose of restraining the assessment or collection of a tax shall be maintained in any court or by any person, whether or not such person is the person against whom the tax was assessed. So they tried to argue that because this is basically a tax law, this is sort of like that whole the decision about Obamacare, where, well, it's a tax. It's not. Wasn't that ultimately the argument in that case where Justice
it was Roberts.
Roberts basically said, well, this is a tax, so it's okay.
Right. That's what he did. Even though the government never argued that it was a tax.
Yes. Well, in this case, they tried to argue that this is a tax, and under the Tax Anti-Injunction Act, you can't file suit. But Judge Reed O'Connor said he did not have to consider AIA because he would not issue an injunction. Instead, he was going to vacate the law. So he just knocked the rule down entirely. And so now if you have a bump stock, or not a bump stock, if you have a pistol brace on your AR pistol, you're safe to put it back on for the time being. The judge was concerned that the ATF could not explain how the Bureau classifies pistols with braces as SBRs. That means nobody could basically know whether or not they're possessing a pistol with a stabilizing device or an unregistered SBR unless they were charged with a felony. So basically you wouldn't, because of the way this whole ruling was written, no one could really be certain whether or not they were a felon, which would have a cooling effect on ownership of these items, because if you don't know, you're not going to take a chance.
Right.
Judge O'Connor said the rule was impermissibly vague, quote unquote. Under the final rule, the ATF estimated about 99% of pistols with stabilizing braces would be reclassified as NFA rifles. Wonder what 1% would not. That's interesting.
Yeah.
The ATF contemporaneously issued approximately 60 adjudications pursuant to the final rule that reclassified different configurations of firearms with stabilizing braces as NFA rifles. The ATF provided no explanation for how the agency came to those classifications, and there is no meaningful clarity about what constitutes an impermissible stabilizing brace. In fact, the Fifth Circuit could not find a single given example of a pistol with a stabilizing brace that would constitute an NFA exempted pistol brace.
What?
But it issued right. They issued exemptions, apparently on 1%, but could not define why their exemption was given. I'm guaranteeing it's because they were political donors.
Yeah.
The Democrats.
This just gets weirder and weirder.
You. I know. I didn't see that before. That's really cool. So, I can put my pistol brace back on my. Well, no, I've already registered mine as an SBR. Dang it!
Maybe you can get a refund.
Oh, well. I get a refund
from the government. Yeah, right.
I can take it off. My understanding is you can take it. Your registered SBR or SBS. You can actually turn it back into a pistol. There's some paperwork you have to file, but you can do that. So if you wanted to switch it back to a pistol, you could. I'll need to check with my local gun shop to see if I can understand how that works.
I bet you it's one of those things though that they probably would charge you a fee for processing.
Oh,
I doubt they'll refund your $200 tax stamp.
Oh, no, definitely not.
And if you ever wanted to use it again as an SBR, they charge you that extra $200 stamp.
Right. There's another $200 stamp
absolutely
just to
ridiculous.
Change it back. Yeah, we need to basically shut down. We need to get rid of the NFA, and we need to get rid of we really ought to get rid of the ATF. It's redundant. I don't understand why we have it anymore. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms sounds like something that we ought to have at a party.
Right.
Not.
Sounds like the perfect name for a man's favorite big box store.
Yes. Absolutely right.
Here we got our ARs next to our cigars.
That's perfect. Now, the last ruling was a preliminary injunction against the ATF from enforcing another final rule that they had issued regarding the idea of being, or how they define being engaged in the business of selling firearms. So basically what the ATF wanted to do was, well, let me read here. I'm sure they'll explain it better than I will. Texas versus ATF, God bless Texas, filed by Gun Owners of America, Gun Owners Foundation, Virginia Citizens Defense League, Tennessee Firearms Association, the states of Louisiana, Utah, Mississippi, and Texas. This lawsuit was filed after the ATF announced a new rule requiring most gun sellers to obtain an FFL before selling any firearms. Any firearms. So if you just sold one gun to your friend, you would have to get an FFL first.
Yep.
If you sold one gun at a gun show, or your buddy said, "Hey, I really like that hunting rifle. I would really like to have that." You can't just sell it to them. You have to get an FFL first. This was a rule requested by Joe Biden. This is, he's been frustrated not being able to pass universal background checks. So you can do an end around by forcing everybody who wants to sell a firearm to get a federal firearms license, and federal firearms licensees have to perform background checks.
Right.
So it's just a backdoor way of trying to force the universal background checks that he can't get passed into law.
Well, and the way to have handled that then is just, if you perform a private sale, just do it through an FFL, and then you wouldn't have to be a licensed dealer yourself. But
right.
I don't have to go through the local DMV every time I decide to sell a car to somebody.
Right. And this also, and this is something that you and I have talked about in the past, especially with regards to things like red flag laws, is this idea of due process and the presumption of guilt.
Right.
Where it presumes that if you sell a gun to a friend that you're up to something nefarious. The ATF used the power they claimed that they had been given by our good old buddy John Cornyn and other members of Congress through the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to change the rule on who needs an FFL to sell a gun. The ATF said a person no longer needs to be selling firearms. This is what it used to be. It used to be that you had to be engaged in business in other words, you're selling guns as a means of earning a living.
Right.
Now, under the new rule, the quote-unquote final rule, you were considered, that was no longer the engaged in business clause or whatever was no longer applicable. It didn't matter whether you were trying to make a living selling guns or whether you were just selling one gun. You were considered an unlicensed dealer if you didn't have an FFL. Simply by advertising a gun for sale, not even for selling it, just by advertising it or creating a flyer or posting it online. That puts you in violation of the law. So, before the rule was enacted, plaintiffs in the case asked the federal district court judge Matthew Kaczmarek, I'm going to guess is how you pronounce it, to issue a temporary restraining order to prevent the rule from being enacted. The Northern District of Texas judge granted the request for a restraining order for the plaintiffs, including residents of the named states and members of the organizations that I mentioned earlier. The ATF would answer by stating that none of the parties have standing to sue, an idea that Judge Kaczmarek outright rejected. The judge also highlighted how the rule differs from the BSCA, that Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which they cited as a reason for doing it. According to the judge, it differs from that law and said that difference could violate the Administrative Procedures Act, and therefore the plaintiffs are likely to succeed if they sued on the merits of the case. So the judge seemed to, the judge said basically that he had an issue with the idea that someone selling a single firearm could require an FFL, which is not mentioned in that bipartisan Safer Communities Act.
Well, and the fact that the assumption with this ruling by the ATF is that if you're a private individual and you're trying to sell a firearm, that you must be involved in some sort of nefarious dealing. It's just absolutely asinine.
Yes. So here's a quote from Judge Kaczmarek's ruling. The final rule clashes with the text of the BSCA in 3 ways, at least 3 ways, he says. First, it asserts there's no minimum number of firearms to actually be sold to be, quote, engaged in business for the purpose of licensing. A single firearms transaction or even the mere offer to engage in a transaction might suffice. And he also said that plaintiffs would likely suffer irreputable harm if the rule were allowed to go into effect, because it could lock up a person's funds if they're trying to sell guns for things like paying bills. The judge noted that the balance of interest must be decided for the plaintiffs if the rule is unlawful. Moreover, there is, quote, there is generally no public interest in the perpetuation of unlawful agency action, he wrote. And as this court's analysis makes clear, defendant's final rule is almost certainly violative, at the very least, of the Administrative Procedures Act. As such, both the balance of equities and the public interest weigh in favor of allowing orderly judicial review of the rule before anyone shuts down their business or sends them to jail. So it's the rule, if it goes into effect, I guess it already had gone into effect, would basically, like you said, presume that anyone who tries to sell a gun is up to no good if they don't get an FFL first. Crazy.
Insane when you consider also the effort and the money involved, all the hoops you have to jump through in order to obtain an FFL license is insane. And you've also had in recent years the ATF refusing to renew licenses for people who do not have a storefront.
Right.
So you're going to go through all these hoops to sell a gun or two a year because you're a hobby collector and you like to buy and sell. Just
right.
But as you said, the whole purpose behind it was to create a de facto registry that they don't want anybody selling private party without a background check, because they want this universal background check pushed through, which in essence, there already is a universal background check law. If you buy from any licensed dealer, by law, they must do a background check on you unless there's some states have a stipulations that if you have a permit to carry, the background check isn't required.
Right. But if you're forced to get an FFL, you're immediately on a registry.
Yep.
And there's, again, that, like I mentioned earlier, there's that chilling effect where if someone is considering selling guns, like this judge mentions, say to make some money to pay some bills, something that I've done, for example.
I've done the same.
That if you stop and think, oh, wait, I've got to go through all these hoops to get an FFL, never mind then. Right? They're hoping that there's that chilling effect that would prevent people from actually going through with it. But the fact of the matter is that people will sell firearms whether, I hate to admit it, people are going to sell a gun whether you say they have to get a background check, and we've talked about this many, many times, how background checks don't do anything to stop actual criminals because they're not going through background checks as it is. Criminals who want to transfer firearms to other people are not going to, if they won't go through a background check and buy a gun legally, as it is, they're not going to go through the trouble of getting an FFL.
Right.
So this doesn't do anything to prevent crime. This is all about tamping down on personal, legal possession of firearms.
And that's every gun control law. That's exactly what it does. It makes it more difficult for the law-abiding citizen. It in no way impacts the criminal because they don't follow the law to begin with. They're still going to find a way to get their guns by illegal means.
I'm convinced that the argument that the argument that they constantly make about, saving lives and public safety and all this stuff is all just a bunch of BS anyway. It's
ultimately because they hate liberty and they want a way to be able to tamp down on your constitutional rights. It's about control. I'm put on my tinfoil hat for a moment that there is a part of me that is convinced that there are individuals within our government that want the crime, that want the chaos. They never address ways of actually getting illegal firearms off the streets and out of the hands of gangbangers. They only want to take away our guns, the law-abiding, those who would, if push came to shove, be willing to stand in opposition to a tyrannical government. They don't want us armed. They want to take away our firearms.
Yeah, for all the talk about defending democracy, that they're talking so much about how this next election is a fight for democracy. As much as they talk about defending democracy, they really don't like democracy.
No,
they really don't want it. And
they want democracy in the sense that Benjamin Franklin described it. A wolf and a sheep, two wolves and a sheep arguing over what's for supper. That's the kind of democracy that they want.
Yeah. And they don't want anybody having the ability that the Constitution affirms that we have to stand up to their decisions should they decide to push the limits a little bit and get tyrannical.
Right.
The Second Amendment is the one bulwark against that. And if that goes away, then there's no limit, because we've seen what they've done, what they can do with federal agencies. We've seen what they've done in corrupting the courts and the so-called justice system. If the Second Amendment goes the way of the dodo, there is absolutely nothing stopping runaway government from just steamrolling over you and me.
Right. We no longer have that firewall of protection between ourselves and the government. It's gone.
Yep. That is the final of the checks and balances. And all of the other checks and balances just keep, folding and disappearing on us. We're almost, I hate to, again, like you said earlier, the tinfoil hat stuff, I hate to put the tinfoil hat on, but it feels like the day is not long coming when that last bulwark is maybe necessary.
Yep.
Well, we'll pray that isn't the case, and we'll just have to wait and see. Pastor, thanks for taking the time to do this. It's been great getting back together with you, and looking forward to doing it again soon.
Yes, indeed.
Folks, if you have any questions or any comments about anything that we said here today, we would love to hear from you. Visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a message. We would love to hear from you, respond to you in a future episode. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like us to opine about in a future episode, please do so there. We would love to hear from you. Be sure to tune in next time for whatever we come up with next. Might be another one of these. That would be awfully fun. Might be a variety show. Who knows? Whatever we do, I'm sure it'll be fun. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.